Almost 1 week after the release of patch 0.20 Charlie with its changes to Fortitude, Healing Mist, and consumables more broadly, we're getting another patch. Now this is going to be the first patch that I'm looking at for Arkheron that's going to have a rotation of Eternals. So in addition to going over the patch notes themselves, I'm going to tell you what I think the relative power rankings are of the various Eternals relative to where they were in the past patch. Note that this doesn't mean that if a character was previously D tier, they become A tier. What this means at best is that they are benefiting slightly from metagame adjustments and considerations based on the Eternal hero pool and what you might find in Arenas 3v3. So here we go, we have Arkheron patch notes update 0.20E. And it's going to be a short one. We'll get into this longer part later. This build will be playable on our playtest client. Get access to the client here. Join in on the community nights for Thursday, Friday night fights, or by jumping into custom games at any time. Yes, and that's what many people did as soon as these patch notes went live, and they were able to download these changes into the game. Eternal rotation. We'll talk about this at the end. Karriv and Tsu-nshi have been rotated back in. Irenna and Leodin have been rotated out. Let's get to the next part here. Healing. Healing mists have been removed from the game. These may return in the future as an eternal ability on a new item set. This is not yet confirmed, and there's no timeline for these changes. The reasoning is that Healing Mist, is currently too overpowered as a healing source. Moving it to an ability with a cooldown helps balance out some of this power. Now, there was a hue and cry in the community after the release of patch 0.20C, in which Healing Mists were buffed in multiple ways. Not only could you hold a greater number of Healing Mists than previously, the healing that they provided was changed from healing 50 to healing 60, and having multiplicative effects. This caused a metagame very quickly to develop, in which players would gather around each other and throw healing mists at their feet in response to CC, that is crowd control, big ultimates, or damage effects. Now, there was a fallout from the result of this change, and there was also a clear separation between how people felt about this change, depending on whether they were a solo queue player, a trio queue player, or had competitive aspirations. There's a lot to go into that, and I'll make it its own separate video. Suffice to say that while that change was in, it coincided with a double or even triple nerf to healing potions that made them unviable as a source of self-sustain. Therefore, healing mists and this kind of stacking became the meta, and there were people who wrote inflamed, impassioned posts on the Discord saying, we will not continue to play the game if it is in this state. So I'm going to take this opportunity to say thank you, Bonfire Studios, for making that change. I am one of the many, many people who wanted to see it. Now let's get to the other patch note. And yes, you might note I said patch note, singular. Healing potions have had their cast time reduced to 1 second, down from 1.5 seconds. So previously, healing potions prior to 0.20C, the previous patch that I did a first look for, they took 0.75 seconds to heal, something around 150. They were then nerfed to 1.5 seconds to instantly heal, not heal over time, but instantly heal 125 health. They have now been changed so that they take 1 second to heal 125 health. This means that you are more likely to die than you were previously, as you have to wait another literal quarter second to get the effect off, and it will not be as powerful as it was before. However, initial impressions from what I've seen of arena games are very positive to this change. There seems to be a healthy balance that has emerged as a result of this, of people playing both healing potions and fortitude, particularly with the eternal rotation that we're going to talk about now. Eternal rotation. Karriv and Tsu-nshi have been rotated back in. Irenna and Leodin have been rotated out. Now, Leodin was on most people's tier list as an S tier Eternal. This is an Eternal that, most damningly for everyone else who wanted to interact with him, had a multitude of effects that made him functionally immortal or invincible. His ultimate launched him up into the sky, from which he could not take damage. He had a crown ability that was possibly one of the best in the game, turning him invincible, and at level 3 granting him lifesteal equal to 100% of the damage that he did with the ability. The most problematic ability, particularly in Spires or in Arena, was his R, his Sanctuary Amulet. This would cast an area upon which everyone on your team was steadfast. This means they could not be displaced, they could not be slowed, they could not be stunned, and that's meant in practice, in very high-level games, that both teams would have a Leodin who would alternate throwing down their amulets into a generous area of effect, and both teams would have to wait to spend all of their cooldowns and all of their crowd control effects, and this led to a very passive back-and-forth game style. Not to mention that he had a pretty easy combination with his ultimate swapping to his hammer, right-clicking to do damage, spacebarring, and then doing some additional damage on a somewhat buffed, somewhat nerfed hammer that did crushing damage and so did not care about the recent fortitude breakpoints. For this reason and others, Leodin was at the very minimum the top of A tier, absolutely S tier in the estimation of most of the player base, and was worthy of consideration for rotation just because people were tired of how much invincibility or how much uninteractivity Leodin was generating into the game. The other character that was rotated out is Irenna. Now, Irenna previously, in my estimation, had been something of a DC bordering tier Eternal. Then Irenna got a series of buffs that got crazier and crazier. So the Caretaker Sword got a buff that gave it mini slows. They had always had those, but they were extended from 0.25 seconds to 1 second. This meant that Irenna could jump in on you and then would continuously be able to chase down the subject of their aggression rather than being punished for blowing out of their cooldowns. Irenna has overhealing in the form of their overshield, of their Irenna crown armor. This is extremely good, and it negated piercing and crushing. Piercing in particular being a trait that ignores fortitude, goes straight through into damage, and is an attribute on the majority of the best in slot or consideration for best in slot weapons in the entire game. Another thing that Irenna did that was particularly good for her was she got buffs to her mace. She had a 1.5 second slow root at level 3, which is commonly played in arenas and sometimes seen in Ascension. This was buffed to 2 seconds. All of these things made it that Irenna turned from an Eternal that would dive in on top of you after slowing you, spin around to do damage with their ultimate, and then leave and take damage on the back end of a trade. Now Irenna had transformed into a character that slows you, roots you long enough to get bonus damage procced off of her sword, which she uses to stab you and interrupt all of your abilities. And all of these things were extremely negative for characters who needed to use their abilities to be effective. Most interestingly, characters like Dala, characters like Adani, characters without natural resistances. Now let's get into the other two, Karriv and Tsu-nshi. Karriv has 2 melee weapons, but is functionally a mage. They have some kind of armor that they can put down that it reduces damage in areas surrounding themselves. They have a giant shovel swing that does damage in an arc moving forward, out and away from them. They can drop an amulet that has a line of damage over time that they drop down into an area to punish you for walking over it. And their ultimate is a giant radius a giant circle centered on themselves that makes it such that you take damage when you navigate over the line as it draws closer and closer to Karriv. Karriv is a fan favorite, particularly I've noticed from the South American and Central American regions of the world. So a lot of people were very happy to see Karriv in. They might not be too happy to realize the impacts of the nerfs that came in beforehand. So I've broadly laid out what those Eternals are and do. Again, we're going to be talking about 4 of them. We're going to be talking about Irenna and Leodin, which were rotated out, and Karriv and Tsu-nshi, which were rotated back in. So rather than go into another 25-minute discussion of the whole meta breakdown, all I'll do is I'll give you my opinion on what these changes will result in terms of the arena's full level 3 metagame, and what changes I expect to benefit from that, and then what Eternals benefit most from the metagame shakeup. Notice that any metagame shakeup is not purely a benefit in terms of, the character's stats have been increased or decreased in some way. But what I'm getting at is this character is more likely to fulfill more roles or have more freedom to move, the more positive the rating is that I'm going to give them. I'm going to go through all of the Eternals right now. So, for instance, if I say that Dala is +3, that means that Dala is less encumbered by metagame considerations than they were in the past, and they overall benefit more from the removal of those old Eternals, Leodin and Irenna, than they are hurt by the inclusion of the new Eternals, Karriv and Tsu-nshi. So Dala is in fact +3, Adani 0, going to stay about the same. Grimwald is -1, benefits from the loss of Leodin's Glint Sphere and the lack of Steadfast from the Sanctuary aura. Doesn't benefit, however, from all of the things that could be done to them by Tsu-nshi. Hollow is 0. Hollow is not unaffected, but is mathematically so. What I mean by that is Hollow appreciates that there is not a Sanctuary amulet stopping half of their kit from doing what they want it to do, and frankly, they do appreciate that there is not the power of Irenna's overhealing showing up, but the fact that Tsu-nshi blind that works, and is the jump from the Wrath Cleaver is a close enough approximation to the Leodin ultimate to punish Hollow for their lack of mobility, means that Hollow is going to have higher highs and lower lows in this patch. Irenna doesn't matter because they were just taken out. Karriv is actually +1. Karriv, yes, despite being one of the Eternals that rotates in, Karriv benefits from the fact that Leodin is out, but more importantly from the fact that Irenna is out. Karriv's entire shtick, his raison d'etre, if you will, is his defining quality, is his damage over time. And a character like Irenna, who can jump right on top of Karriv, who doesn't have very good or any mobility options, and actually can't straight up brawl someone or punish someone who has overhealing or overshield the way that Irenna does, means that Karriv is coming in at a pretty good point in the metagame for themselves. Leodin doesn't count again. Penelope is net 0. Yes, the loss of Glint Spear is pretty good, and fewer things tying them down is better, but they're coming into a space where Karriv is just going to drop an anchor, make it difficult for any of their minor damage to explode and do something meaningful, and Penelope has a lot of problems that aren't really impacted or benefited from the characters who left or are coming in. Rava is +1. This is a good time to mention again that this is not a statement that this character should be up in your tier list. I am not saying that Rava has been unimpacted by the previous buffs and nerfs, mostly nerfs that came to them in patch 0.20c. However, Rava does benefit from the fact that there is no Glint Spear, there is no Leodin jump coming in from the sky and stomping on them and then running them down. And also Irenna was so sticky with the Caretaker that if you didn't have the right click of Talonflight Crossbow, it could be very difficult to escape. In contrast, characters like Tsu-nshi are infinitely more, not survivable, but escapable for Rava. Tsu-nshi themselves is like Karriv, coming in at a good point in the metagame for themselves. That's going to be a +1. And then Subo benefits as well. Both Tsu-nshi and Subo benefit, one from the fact that they're both in the same pool as each other. They can play Tsu-nshi and have the benefit of both of their set bonuses at the same time. But the loss of not one but two piercing weapons, that is the Caretaker sword over there for Irenna and Leodin's Glint Spear, means that they're more likely to be able to play around their fortitude-based game plans. And Vatan benefits as well with a +1. Vatan didn't really like the fact that Irenna had the overshield, as the overshield made it such that turning on Payback Crown was less of a positive damage relationship than Vatan would have liked. And I'm just going to go ahead and show that here. Pause for a second, you can take a look at it yourself. So there we go. You can see right there, this is the quick breakdown. And again, I'm going to do this every time that we get a patch that rotates Eternals out and then new Eternals in. And I might even make another video talking about why it's brilliant that Bonfire Studios, instead of adding to the complexity of the mental stack of how many Eternals you have to pay attention to, just lowers it to 10. And then makes the decision to include and remove as need be. I'll see you on the river, and thanks again.